All right. So today's all about operating procedures, using repeaters and a little bit on what you do on HF, because you can operate on 10 meters on voice
Mm.
if you have an HF transceiver. So, I mean, you kind of already know this, that you're really, as a technician, you're pretty much limited to VHF, UHF, except for that small 10-meter segment where you can do voice. You're limited to line of sight. So the only way to get more than a few miles is through a repeater, unless you happen to be on top of a hill or have a really big antenna or something. And we've talked about repeaters before. They're called a repeater because it repeats the signal on a different frequency. So you listen to it on the advertised frequency, like the KSC one is 444.925. That's what it's transmitting on, and that's what you're listening to. When you transmit, there's a 5 megahertz offset. So you transmit 449.925 to transmit to the repeater. And they all have, if it's, and I'm, well,
So
sorry.
that's why when you set the channels in your radio, you have that offset.
Right.
Okay,
And in UHF, it's 5 megahertz up or down.
okay,
It can be either. Typically it's up, but it can be minus 5 megahertz. On VHF, it's 600 kilohertz,
okay.
plus or minus.
Oh.
And then there's also a, well, we'll get to it. Access tone, a lot of them use. So that it's a frequency below, what is it, 250 hertz, something like that? The CTCSS,
Supposed to be a subaudible tone.
right? I think
I
it's
think the highest one that I've seen is like in 160 or something like
Yeah,
that.
somewhere in the under 200 range. And you can't really hear them on the radio, but
Mhm.
the repeater does. So that way, like in the case of the KSC one, there's another repeater in Jacksonville on the same frequency.
Hmm.
Depending on propagation, sometimes that one was getting in.
Oh.
So if it has a different access tone, then that kind of helps to prevent that. So, first question of the day. What type of amateur station simultaneously transmits the signal of another amateur station on a different channel or channels? What types of amateur stations can automatically retrans the signals of other stations?
Delta.
All right. Okay. In some cases, they link repeaters together. The SARNet here in Florida is an example.
Mhm.
It's the, what, Southern Area Repeater Net,
Statewide area repeater.
statewide. And
What's
they're
the
all
purpose of it?
basically for emergency services. And they're lined up, well, I believe there's 40,
Around 40. Yeah.
basically along the north and south expressways.
Okay,
I-75, I-95 and I-10 are pretty well covered. You get outside of that range, you might find some dead spots.
okay.
And
That's what you heard the guy from Dothan on. was that
Yeah.
Sarnet.
Was that SARNet that night?
Yeah.
I just had it turned on and happened to pick him up, and they were shocked that he was talking on the SARNet that was here from Dothan, Alabama.
well,
And whoever was on the net at that time, I think you said there's some guy that's always on there.
K4NRD, that's Patrick Lighthouse.
And he told the guy in Dothan, he said, man, I don't know what's going on with your antenna, but something's not right, because you really shouldn't be, we shouldn't be,
it's called propagation.
there you go. That's why when you're talking about propagation, I mean, that's.
Sometimes that's why Jacksonville could get to KSC
Mhm.
sometimes.
And who was the other, what was the other? Tallahassee? Was it Tallahassee that was also came in on that SARNet?
Yeah. That
Wow,
guy-
now
that guy
that's,
was- He was saying if he could get to the repeater, and I think it was Sebring, that he could get all the way to the Keys, that was saying.
But the reason he was on there was he was telling everybody about those storms that came through Tallahassee a couple of weekends ago. And he was talking about what was going on up there.
yeah, that's primarily what it's
That
for.
was so
And
interesting.
they really don't want you to rag chew.
Yeah,
I mean, you can use SARNet for a quick thing and then, go to something else, but
yeah, because he told that one guy from Dothan, he said, we need to switch channels, turn to this frequency or whatever, because we don't really need to be on this.
yeah.
Okay. That's all.
Sometimes they're connected via internet. SARNet is, I think microwave. I know it doesn't use the internet.
SARNet is microwave,
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't use the internet because in a storm, the internet would go down, but the microwave antennas are pointed and they've all the SARNet stations have emergency power backup. I
Okay.
don't know how many times, how many levels of emergency backup they have, but they all have emergency power backup.
And when it's a linked network like SARNet,
Mhm.
you transmit to whatever the closest repeater is that you're accessing. But every repeater in that group retransmits, which
Okay.
is why you can talk to people in Dothan, Alabama, or
Okay.
I've heard Georgia people
Mhm.
close to the border.
Okay.
There's also some digital voice networks. They all use the internet. And they're specialized repeaters
Mhm.
for DMR, D-Star, and Fusion. And they all are somewhat proprietary, where you have to buy a DMR radio or a D-Star radio or a Fusion radio. And it's not easy to get them to interact, I
Mhm.
guess. Supposedly there's ways in the internet you can do that bridging.
Mhm.
I've never tried it, but in theory, you can get from D-Star to DMR and back. Not a test question.
Okay.
Which of the following describes a linked repeater network?
Alpha.
He's reading them all twice, right?
That's a lot of answers there.
Yeah. Never grab the first one that looks right. In order to use a repeater, you have to program your radio with the receive and transmit frequencies, or in a lot of cases, you put in the offset. It depends on the radio, on how you program it. Like we were just talking earlier on your Baofeng,
The Bofang,
You
the
put
DM
transmit and
1701,
receive.
Yeah,
where on my ICOM, I put the offset.
and on this one here, this one, chirp, if you use chirp to program this one, 'cause it's analog, so the offset automatically populates based on your frequency. Because the direction of the offset is dependent on where your frequency is, as far as a guideline. You're not.
So should we get that chirp?
Only if it supports your radio.
Hmm.
It doesn't support all radios.
We had the Bofang.
The UV5 well, yeah, if you've got a Bofang, chirp
Yep.
supports it.
Yeah,
As
but-
long as it's an analog Bofang.
Oh,
The DMRs do not work on chirp.
But at least on the Baofeng I have, you can download their programming software for free
oh.
if it's a Baofeng.
Okay. Okay.
That's good, 'cause you were programming all the offset and everything with the pad.
Well, I was trying to, but
On the keypad, yeah.
yeah.
I definitely.
It's tedious. You can do it.
Program.
Yeah, it's tedious
Shoot
because
on it.
I'm trying to find it, and if you wait too long, it goes all the way
Right,
back and you gotta.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
you gotta
tedious.
pick the channel and you gotta go through the menu and.
You say tedious, I say frustrating.
Okay, but basically that's what you're doing is you're setting up the receive and transmit frequencies, however. The programming software wants you to do it. And you'll also put in the access tone called CTCSS. Continuous tone squelch something.
Okay.
Um. And like I said, the offset is 600 kilohertz on VHF or 2 meters. And 5 megahertz on 70 centimeters, that's UHF.
Okay.
And that also applies to satellites, because it's a repeater in the sky. So what's a common repeater frequency offset in the 2 meter band? What'd you say?
Bravo.
Probably. Okay. What's a common repeater frequency in the 70 centimeter band? So you could get one or the other of those.
Yes,
You won't get both.
no. 50-50.
You get one per group.
Okay. As in the question.
Right.
Okay.
And these are all in the same group
Okay.
for. Let's see. Oh, interference, like I said, you can get, due to propagation,
Mhm.
you could get a distant transmission on the same frequency. And that's why they use the continuous tone coded squelch system. Or CTSS, sometimes they call it PL tone. And they're subaudible, yeah, under 257 hertz. 131.8 seems to be a very popular one. Maybe because it's kind of in the middle, I don't know. Now, there's also a digital version of it called digital code squelch, which if you've got a DMR or D-Star, one of those with digital voice, it'll usually have a DCS. And in addition, if it's DMR, they also, instead of the access tone analog one, they throw in color code, which is a digital number between 0 and 31 or 32. So instead of an analog tone, it's a number that you need to access it. So what term describes the use of a subaudible tone transmitted along with normal voice audio to open the squelch of a receiver?
Mhm. Okay.
And you know what squelch is, right?
Yes.
Which of the following could be the reason you are unable to access a repeater you can hear? Could be any of those.
Mm-hmm. It's all.
And you can have those CTCSS tones
Mhm.
on both transmit and receive.
Mm.
Now this I have actually never done. Have you done a reverse function? Where you listen to the input signal on the repeater?
I tried it one time just to see, I mean, I didn't have a problem, but I was just checking it out to see what would happen.
I don't know that all radios have it, but supposedly you can try this reverse function and you can actually listen. I think it takes 2 radios. To your signal that's going to the repeater,
Mhm.
so you can tell what
Oh,
the repeater is receiving. It's just a troubleshooting thing.
okay.
If you're getting distorted transmissions, it's usually because you're either talking too loud into the microphone or too close, like directly into it. You should always kind of talk across it.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're kind of spitting in it and blowing in it.
Okay.
Makes a lot of extra noise.
And with these, that's usually not a problem. Usually the problem with any of these less expensive radios is that you're not loud enough.
Okay.
So I got corrected on that, by the first 2 or 3 contacts that I made after I got my technician license.
Mhm.
They said you need to either speak louder or speak closer to the mic.
Oh,
And the first objective was to figure out which one of these holes on the front is the mic.
It's a little tiny one.
Yeah.
oh, it is.
Yeah.
And like on the one in my Jeep, it's another Chinese radio, but it.
Oh, that little hole right
the
there?
quality
Yeah.
control mics.
I thought it was
the
that
radio
whole-
is solid as
No, that's
can be.
That's the
speaker.
speaker.
Quality control on
Wow.
mics is such that the hole where the mic is and where the mic is holding place inside don't always match up. So it blocks a lot of your voice power off. And one of the first things a lot of people have to do when they get that radio is take the clamshell of the mic apart and drill that hole out one size larger so that it gets more off the mic.
And depending on how you hold it, you could have your finger over it.
Did you see the little hole? Tiny little hole up there.
That's the mic right there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So he's right, if you're holding on top of it, you
Yeah,
could
you
be covering.
cover that.
Right there on this one. Right below the transmit light
Wow. Mhm.
or the activity light, it turns green, receiving and red. when you transmit.
Okay.
How is a VHF, UHF repeater's reverse function used?
Try.
What would cause your FM transmission audio to be distorted on voice peaks?
Well, if it's bothing, it's theta. For this, it's Charlie.
Yeah.
That's interesting about talking too loud.
What happens is you're clipping the signal instead of having a sine wave modulation.
Uh-huh.
It just goes up to a certain point and then it cuts it off. So you're basically converting it to a square wave, which contains a bunch of odd
I
harmonics.
was gonna say, so you're losing.
Yeah, the effect is different, because like what he's talking about, clipping causes distortion.
Mhm.
But in the case with these, you're talking, they're just barely getting a signal at all, because you're not modulating anything. Or you're modulating very weakly, so you speak louder to increase
That's
the
right.
modulation.
Because in your mind, you're like, well, I need to be talking louder. It's, okay.
I've always been a loud talker anyway, so.
Okay, so- Now that you got your radio set up, how do you make a contact? You give your call sign followed by monitoring or listening. I think most people say listening, but it could be either.
Just don't use Bob's calls.
Yeah, use Dan's, because the FCC could be listening is unlikely.
Oh, that brings up a question. I'm glad you said that. Goes back to classes before. When you said that the FCC can check your records, what records are you keeping? Every time you go on the radio, you have to have a log?
No, not anymore.
Okay,
That used to be a requirement.
so now they're just coming to see if you're licensed?
You have to have a copy of your station license
Okay,
and your operator's license. You kind of get two little, if you print them out, two little
Okay.
pieces of paper. One's a certificate and the other one's like a wallet size.
okay,
You have to have however you do it, your radiation exposure results.
oh, okay,
In fact, that's probably the biggest thing they would look for now.
sure,
Well, you need proof your license first,
yeah,
but then the radiation exposure.
for like your antenna.
Well, everything. I
Okay.
mean, anything that changes the radiation pattern, you
Okay.
need to do the calculation. And, technically you need to do it with the handheld.
Okay,
You need to, if you got a base station, you need to do it with the base station. If you got an amplifier, you need to do it with and without. If you got more than one antenna,
okay,
if you have a rotatable antenna, you got to do the thing when it's pointed at your neighbor versus.
yeah.
So it could get a
So
lot.
that's-
Now, there
that's
are
not a lot.
calculators where you just fill in information and it gives you the results.
Yeah, he was talking about that a couple of weeks ago. Where
Yeah.
you can go somewhere and,
Yeah, the ARL has one. You can download the bulletin from the FCC, which shows you how to calculate it.
okay,
And then the third method, which I don't think anybody does, is actually a calibrated field strength meter and you walk around and measure it.
oh, well,
But that's kind of
okay,
expensive and hard.
okay.
Now, a broadcast station might do that. Might be required, I'm not sure.
Okay, I just, I meant to ask that last week. I'm like, well, what do you have to keep up with? Okay,
So you give your call sign and basically you're telling them that you're listening for somebody to contact you. If you're trying to contact somebody directly,
mhm,
you know who they are, then you would give their call sign followed by here is or this is your call sign and wait for them to come back to you.
okay,
And then you'd start a two-way conversation. And when you, like, if you say you're monitoring and somebody calls you back, then you give their call sign and then your call sign, just like when you're trying to make a direct contact.
another question on the call signs. So the technician gets the longer call sign,
Well,
and then there's one less over there. Do you
Your
get any-
systematically
necessarily.
applied call sign will be 6 characters.
Okay.
It'll be 2 alpha, then a numeric, and
Okay.
numeric is based on your region when you apply, which
Okay.
for us is 4. And then you'll have 3 more letters afterward.
Just any
Yeah.
letters
Yeah,
that-
well, it's sequential.
Okay.
Whatever's the next available call sign in the system.
basically, the only thing you can't have is a 1x2 or a 2x1.
Okay.
That's only extra,
Okay,
but you can have 1x3. That's what mine is,
okay,
or a 2x2, 2x3, 1x3.
okay. I just wondered if, when, like, I know you're a
Extra.
extra. So I didn't know if that meant that's why you've got the one that.
No,
Okay,
I would have had to just make it RL or something and
okay.
not,
Cause I know you said you can have your call sign forever.
yes, as long as you stay current,
So even if you stepped your license up, you would still have.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you have, to get anything else, you have to apply for a vanity license.
Right.
Okay,
I mean, you'll get a sequentially assigned call sign.
Okay.
And if you want something different, then you have to fill out a different form. Apparently you can't do it on the 605. Used to, you could do that when you applied for your license. You
Mm.
can't anymore.
okay,
It's a different form and you can list up to 20 call signs that you want to pick from,
okay,
and they will
Go to the
assign you the
website.
first one available on your list,
okay.
if any are available. And you really need to check it out first,
Sure.
So.
but it costs $35.
Plus $35. And my advice is that if you decide to get, cards to send to people when you contact them,
Mhm.
don't do it until you get your call sign, your regular call sign, because, I bought 250 cards and then 2 months later changed my call sign, so now I've got 240 cards. That's my call sign.
Okay. Thank you.
That's like business cards.
Yes.
And they actually do have, the printers are on top of it. They're ready to do whatever you want.
Oh,
They've got, and you might want to see this, Bob.
So,
I just noticed that, well, I had this, but I didn't tie it all together until I was going through some stuff trying to organize my room.
Well, you got a Gary card.
Yeah, what's going to eventually be my
Yeah.
campsite.
Mhm.
And my wife made the mistake this week of calling it my man cave.
Uh-oh.
And I stopped in my tracks and I turned around and I looked at her and she said, yes, I said it.
All right,
Okay, I
so is that clear?
think so.
All right. What is an appropriate way to call another station on a repeater if you know the other station's call sign?
Yes, well,
Now, that would be the same thing on simplex,
Yeah.
not just a repeater.
okay.
And A is the way to get nobody to answer.
I know that breaker.
Well, you might get an answer,
Yeah,
not the
might
kind
be
you
the one
want.
You're looking for.
And the other thing it didn't mention was you should listen first. Make
Okay.
sure somebody's not talking.
Already. Told.
And that's
You
why,
can't interrupt people when they're talking, right? You wait for it to,
yeah, well, and the normal process is you say, this is, unkey the mic for a second or two,
Mhm.
so you can hear if somebody else is also doing it at the same time,
okay.
because you have no way of knowing.
Mm-hmm,
And then you say W3RDL or use phonetics.
mm-hmm,
And if you're making first contact or checking in on the net, they
mm-hmm.
usually prefer you use phonetics because it's easier to understand if it's not a good signal.
Okay,
Whereas you've already talking to somebody, you know each other's call sign, so you don't have to keep doing the phonetics. Which of the following indicates that a station is listening on a repeater and looking for a contact?
um,
FM simplex. We talked about duplex where you're talking to a repeater and you're using a different transmit and receive frequency. When you're doing simplex, you're both talking and receiving on the same frequency.
mm,
So you definitely have to make sure that you unkey the mic or you won't hear
okay,
the other person.
yes,
And one of the purposes is so that you don't use up or busy up the repeater channels like SARNet. You know, they don't mind you making a contact on SARNet, but they want you to move, if possible, to a different channel or simplex. There's some national calling channels for both VHF and UHF. The standard one for 2 meters or VHF is 146.520. There's 3 or 4 secondary ones they're usually listed as a TAC if you look in like the repeater handbook and those. A tactical channel for A, B, C, D, and their different frequencies. We're using 147.420 this morning, which I think is TAC A. I'm not sure.
oh, for what you're doing. Okay.
yeah.
And
Uh,
you'll just set that before you have like one of these simplex.
well, yeah, you
units?
decide
You
on
decide
which
the
one you're gonna
frequency.
use, yeah.
Okay.
And the club typically uses that one for
So
that
147,
exercise.
420.
Yeah. Where 146.520 is they call it the national calling channel.
Okay,
It's probably, well, I don't know if it's busier or not. I don't usually listen to them. And then you have one for 70 centimeters, which is 446.000. And then there's, I think, 3 or 4 others at different frequencies up in the UHF range.
mhm,
So what term describes an amateur station transmitting and receiving on the same frequency? Why are simplex channels designated in the VHF UHF band plans? Alpha. So you don't get off my repeater. What is the national calling frequency for FM simplex operations in the 2-meter band?
Nothing.
That's cheap.
I don't. Wondering
Yeah, you can't write it down,
on the test.
or you can write it down
Oh,
on the answer sheet while you're there, but you can't take it in with you.
okay.
Okay, so we talked about repeaters, auxiliary and space stations work the same way. There's not really any difference. Except they're not located on the ground. Well, auxiliary station could be. And they retransmit on another channel. They can be linked. We talked about the offsets and subaudible tones, CT, CSS. On what that stands for. And what to do if you can't make a connection, what might be wrong. Using the reverse function to troubleshoot to see what the repeater is actually hearing. How you make a repeater contact and how you make contacts on simplex. So